Welcome to Thriving from Anxiety. My name is Sherianna Boyle, and I'm here with my co-host, Cindy Horgan, and we are so excited. This is our first show of many shows we have lined up for you. Our plan is to create some really great conversation about stress and anxiety, particularly in daily life. I know we're going to have a few laughs. I can't possibly sit with Cindy Horgan and not have a few laughs. And we're going to leave you with some tips and tools for ways to cope with stress and anxiety, but also, how do you thrive from it? Can you imagine thriving from anxiety? And yes, you can. I've written several books about it. Cindy is a professional presenter and has a DVD, and we're going to show you how. So in between shows, you can stay in touch with us. You can check out our Facebook page. It's called Thriving from Anxiety, and it is there you can message us, send us comments, and ask us your questions, and we'd be happy to include them in the show. So before we get into anxiety, Cindy's going to talk a little bit about our journey and where we've been.
Yeah, and I'm so excited because Sherry and I began this journey about 15 years ago, and we started it because we came together. She was a school psychologist at the time, and I was starting to do some graduate work around family systems and family support. And after spending a bit of conversation together, we realized that you couldn't do one or the other in isolation, and we came together really doing strength-based family work as far as creating parent education and parent support. We believed that it was the hardest job, and we know that to be true, that any adult takes on, and that is being a parent. So we really have the philosophy, and have continued to share the philosophy, that being perfect in a family doesn't mean healthy. And so what our goal has been is to support strength-based work around strength-based work for children and families. And we've continued to do that. And probably the biggest teacher to us all this time has been the fact that Sherry and I, Sherry with her husband Carrie, have been raising their 3 daughters, and myself and my husband Dan have been in the process of raising our 5 children. And it continues to guide us. It continues to teach me daily about strength-based work and working with healthiness around families and living.
Yes. And also, not to leave out individuals. I mean, the families, but also individuals. Since working with Cindy, I've been teaching at a community college psychology, so I get to meet a lot of young people, and it's a wonderful experience for me. But also, what comes with that is the juggling of school and work and watching these graduates, 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20-year-olds, kind of finding their way. So I don't want to leave out individuals as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we want to talk a little bit about, since this is our first show, what is it when we say anxiety? Because certainly we could all have a different perspective of that. And the way that I like to describe it is kind of like a fever, right? Some days you can have a low-grade fever, right? And you can still get up and do your thing, or even with children. They might go all day long, and then you realize, oh my gosh, they're a little warm. Didn't even realize they had a fever. So with the symptoms of anxiety, how it's really identified is it's chronic worrying. Worry. Also thinking about the future, fearful, self-doubt. And when you worry a lot, what ends up happening is you kind of get insecure, sometimes negative, doom and gloom, and it has physiological effects. It changes your heart rate, and sometimes you sweat a little. I mean, there's so many ranges. So you've got your low-grade fever, right, where you can kind of still go to work and do what you need to do, but you might just have this unsettledness, and many times it comes through distractibility. Right?
Yes.
Or nervousness, or just not able to just not able to just be in the moment, always kind of thinking about the next thing, or so. And then you've got your high grade fever, where you literally, and I've come across students with this, and I'm going to tell you, you know, individuals that have been identified with post-traumatic stress, where they will come to me and say, look, I need you to know I have this, and there are days I can't get out of bed. And specifically, some of these kids who have been overseas and Afghanistan and have come back and doing the best that they can and really struggling with these symptoms. So then you have that middle range, of course. So that's the way I like to look at the symptoms of anxiety.
And I really love the way that you put it with that fever.
Yeah.
In the work that we do, that I do, one of the things that's really interesting is the veterans really brought it to light for us. But when I do my work, and I'm working with children, I'm working with adults, I'm working with individuals, it shows itself. Not necessarily the word anxiety doesn't come out when it's first brought to me. The words that come out are behavior problem, defiance.
That's right.
Ignoring me.
Yes.
Not able to focus.
Yes.
And it's so easy in our society and in our culture. Let's find a label. Let's find a label.
That's right. That's right.
And you know, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with this person? What's wrong here?
Yeah.
And what I've been able to do, especially being in partnership with you, is to really, I call it peeling back the onion.
Yeah.
And let's take a layer at a time off of here.
That's right.
And then I start to see, well, you know what? There is a behavior here. We're not ignoring that.
Yeah.
But let's look at the root, because a lot of times what I feel like we've done is that that saying where the babies coming down the river and we keep plucking them out.
Yeah.
And what we need to do is go back up to the top of the river and find out who's throwing them in.
The source.
The source.
The source.
And so we often spend a lot of time putting a Band-Aid on how it presents.
Right.
And we haven't figured out its beginning.
We're actually focusing on the end product, which is the behavior. Right. The behavior is really the symptom of the source, right?
And the other day I was with a family that had an adolescent, and they were saying, geez, we're not sure if there's a learning disability. And I want to be clear that I'm not dismissing things like learning disabilities. They're very, very real.
Yeah.
But I think the more that I talked to this family, I said, it sounds to me a little bit more like there's a lot of worry going on for this little person.
Yes.
That their attention span is a very short window.
Yes.
Because more time is being put into their worries than their capacity to be a thinker.
Yes.
To get to that front part of that brain.
That's right.
And so when we look at some of our veterans and we look at some of our individuals that are sort of, I don't want to use the word bathed, but drowning in this level of worry. Yes. It's closing down their brain to be a thinker and a problem solver.
Absolutely. And it runs alongside so many things. You know, I mean, these are kids that are identified with attention deficit disorder, and then you realize that so often anxiety is the undercurrent of some of that distractibility or impulsiveness. So you bring up a good point. Sometimes it's hard to tell which is which, and that's really what schools do. They kind of sort through that when they evaluate kids and so on and so forth. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think anxiety is responsible. It is really the source of so many different diagnoses out there, health concerns that are out there. Yeah.
And I think that one of the things that Sherry and I have done in the past is really looked at gender. And we've looked at sort of the levels that our little girls are growing into women experiencing. And what anxiety does to our little boys that become men.
That's right.
And very intentionally, as a mom of 3 sons, I pay very close attention to where their fever is. Is it a low grade right now that's happening here?
Yes.
Or is it, are we near, you need more than an aspirin?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right, and then sometimes you take the aspirin and you feel better, right? Because sometimes we do get a break, or we feel like, oh, okay, I had a good night's sleep, or I had a good meal, and I feel a little bit better now. I feel, okay, I can roll. And then all of a sudden the aspirin wears off, and you're like, oh, here it is again. Here's the symptoms. It's back at me. You know, I find so much as far as getting to the source is what we believe, you know, our belief systems and what's in our subconscious mind, you know, things that we're not even really aware of, that really that come out through behaviors, our thoughts, our attitudes, and I'm sure you see that all the time.
I do.
And you can hear it when you talk to people. It's always fascinating to hear.
Especially when you put your lens on this, and you start to make sense of it. You know, let's take a breath. Let's sit here. Let's sit for a moment. And understand where this is coming from. You know, I think a perfect example, especially when we use the word behavior. Being a mom who has brought many to college. There's a process that takes place when young people are making that next place, going off to college. And it hasn't been unusual for me over the years to hear a parent or a caregiver say to me, I think they want me not to like them. You know, they are just so outrageous, and they just become like, it just becomes almost incredible to think that you can continue to live without hurting them. And so what I've really realized is I peel back the onion, that it has everything to do with what's that fever inside. That low-grade fever is now becoming more intense because this is big.
It's a transition.
It's a transition.
It's a huge transition. And we taught that all the time.
Absolutely.
There's little transitions and there's huge life-changing transitions.
And so one of the things to understand the behavior is it makes sense. It makes great sense. And so that behavior is part of my, how do I go into this new land of fear? And how do I say goodbye to something that I've loved so much? And it goes right to the soul, you know.
Well, and the discomfort that comes along with that, when something feels unsettling, and how we can sort of have a reaction to that. And sometimes that reaction is through behavior, but it doesn't mean that's who we are. And I think that's what I'm so excited about, and with my mission with anxiety, is to really just let people know that's not who you are. That's not who you are. That's not who we are. It's not our natural state.
And the wonderful thing that you're saying is, if by us getting this message out there, hopefully relationships will remain healthy. Because if I can understand that this new person that's kind of really not as nice as I'd like you to be, this is part of the process, this is part of something internal, this is something that's happening from an emotional place, then I'm at a better place to say, I get why you're here. And I can still love you at the end of the day. By the time I came to number 5, I said, listen, I said, I know you're leaving, you know you're leaving. You don't have to do any of that. We'll just be nice to each other.
I mean, we could go off in so many directions, Cindy, because you have really been my role model. I mean, you have, as far as having a marriage and communication in your home. And I'm so excited because you're going to be able to share all of that on this show. But you're right, that relationships, and if we can support ourselves through these symptoms, it really does help. And what it does, what I find, is it helps you to take things less personally. And then we stop the blaming and the attack on each other, and we realize, I'm having a reaction because something is happening inside of me. It's always about us, isn't it?
That's
it really
the root.
is.
It's the root.
It's the bottom line, is it's something's going on with us. And the way I like to look at it is, it's something that's happening for me. Because when you're in the symptoms, I think people sometimes feel like the world's falling apart and everything's against me, Nothing goes my way. Or I get a lot of, the rug is just going to be pulled out from under, things are too good, knock on wood, nobody's been sick, and just this feeling like it's too good to be true to feel at peace or content or to just feel in flow, It's not, it's interesting. It's not so much about happiness, because happiness is temporary. I mean, it's a feeling, right? It's just, but contentment and
I really, the real mission of what we're doing is talking about that there's value of how do we get to that place of thriving from anxiety. And part of the beginning of getting there is to understand its source and to understand how it's driving me and to understand if my reaction to you comes from this place of fear. And you know, and very often some of I think it's like a big pot of soup.
And we're all
and we're serving anxiety. But what are the ingredients in that big pot?
That's right. That's
so their
right.
fear, their self-doubt, their fatigue.
Yes.
Their
fatigue's a big one.
And weariness.
Overwhelmed.
And overwhelmed. And then just kind of, I almost call it
and
like worried in behavior.
And it's conditioned, you know, and then you throw in the pot, you throw in the stereotypes and the shoulds, right?
Yep.
I should be a good mother, I should be, you know, and this constant, that conflict, you know, of push-pull, and that's really how I define stress, is stress, and maybe we need to be clear, the difference between stress and anxiety is stress is a demand being placed upon you, and that's part of life, right? I mean, you can't possibly get through life without having demands, placed upon you.
One of the words is
to adapt, to adapt and cope, right?
To adapt and cope, and the important word that you and I often have in our vocabulary is resiliency.
Yes.
And we cannot have resiliency unless we've been understand the stress in our lives in a healthy dose.
Yes.
Understanding anxiety in our lives in a healthy dose.
Yes.
I had an experience the other day. You know, I'm working on my tan, so I'm on the beach, taking in the moment.
Yes.
And I can see out of the corner of my eye, I see a dad.
Okay.
And he's with probably a 10 or 11-year-old little boy, and they're standing right at the shoreline, and they're there for quite a while. And I can see the dad talking, and the boy, you know, he's kind of hemming and hawing.
Yeah.
And they were probably 15 or 20 minutes there, and the dad said, "It's time." And you could see the son going, I don't know. And the next thing I know is this dad picked up this 10-year-old son, and I'm thinking, oh God, this is going to be ugly.
No.
He's going to throw him in there, but he didn't. He held him.
Wow.
And walked into the water with him, and in a very gentle way, really brought this young man. He
didn't say, "Oh, here you go again," and
you know,
that is.
And it was
beautiful.
such a great example of Dad really respecting that angst, that anxiety in this young man, and in a very gentle and loving way took him into that process. It was just really, it kind of took my breath away. You know
That's
how that
nice.
happens? Yeah.
That's nice. That's really nice. You know, it just, what you're reminding me of is so much of anxiety is what we think, right? So much of our thoughts are triggers, and that's, but they're not truths. That's what I've learned over the years. Our thoughts are triggers, but they're not true. So I'm just imagining what that man was thinking in his head, or maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was feeling it in his heart, you know, and maybe that's
he had been thrown in the water. Serious.
Maybe.
And he said, "I won't do that.
I won't do that to my child."
Yeah.
You know, I can't imagine he was in his head thinking, "How am I going to handle this one?" Or that would be interesting.
I would love to have had a conversation.
But you felt it in your heart.
I did. I felt that this man really was loving this child through this.
Right.
And you know, that's what I think
that it doesn't have to be a struggle.
Right. He didn't need to fix them. He didn't need to, you know.
Right.
He needed to help him.
Right. I love that.
And that's what that difference was.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I feel like part of our missions, part of our journey, and part of our sort of why we're here together, is to really bring a sense of hope.
A sense of hope.
That having anxiety doesn't cripple us. It can guide us.
Absolutely. And well, my recent book was The 4 Gifts of Anxiety, which people are like, "Are you crazy?"
I love it.
Right?
Yeah.
But really, that's what I've come to believe. It's been a tremendous gift in my life, and I won't get into that today. But it really has been a guide, and I've learned so much. And I agree, to give people hope, and also to not put yourself down for it. I feel like we put ourselves, I feel like we're so hard on ourselves, Cindy. I really do. I mean, everybody, parents and kids and, you know, young adults today, they just, maybe it's there's such pressure,
There
you know?
really, and one of, you know,
yeah.
a mantra that we've always had is perfection is
Right.
truly overrated. And if your goal is to be the perfect
What is
person
it
or the
anyway? I
perfect
still
parent,
don't know.
you know, you're going to self-implode.
Yeah,
It really
that's right.
is. And
That's right.
when we first started this work, and I use this analogy, I wanted us to be so great
Yeah.
that Oprah was going to call us up
Yeah.
and say, I need you two ladies on the show. Well, maybe she'll come back. And then I realized that I worked every day to be so great at this.
Right.
And then there's days that maybe Oprah might ring me.
Yes.
But there's days Jerry Springer would like me.
That's right.
You know?
That's right.
But that's called balance.
That's called
And
balance.
so my
yeah.
hope is that I have more of the middle days than the others.
Yeah. Well, you know, and the thing that I write about and what I do, the only thing perfect about each and every one of us is our energy. Right,
There you
because
go.
it's always flowing, and our breath, and if we're going to have something perfect, that's what it's going to be. But you know, Sin, I want to make sure we talk a little bit about our tips for this show.
Sure.
I mentioned triggers for my tip. The thoughts are the triggers, and also in your surroundings. And I know just the other day, I literally. I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I was triggered by bread, a piece of bread.
Really?
And here's the thing, and this is the pressure: white bread, wheat bread, you know. And there's so much pressure as a parent. I literally looked at my children's food, because you know it's summer, and we're filming this in the summer, and so kind of everything goes out, and you're having more fun, and I thought, oh my gosh, are you gonna, you know? And I just looked at their plate, and I was like, you know, we need to start eating more healthy, you know. And I could feel my, you know, getting, and I thought, what am I doing? I was just triggered by a piece of bread, but they're everywhere. So my tip for this week is to just really be aware. Be aware that it's not about the kids making the wrong choice all the time, or even myself, and take, maybe for this show we could take the emphasis off the person.
Right.
And just be aware of our surroundings and how we interact, and just notice about yourself. Wow, I actually felt my heart rate go up over that. And a lot of people with food and things like that does trigger them, because it, you know, they beat themselves up, I guess, you know.
And that's helpful.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And so I think when I thought of my tip, what I always think about is you can only control what you can control. And so one of the things that I pay close attention to is time. And, you know, we're a time-centered place, and these wonderful cultures around us, time is in the moment. We're like, dun, 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 dun. And so when I talk about you can only control what you can control, traffic on Cape Cod means that you're not going to get there any faster
Anywhere.
if you yell and
anywhere.
If you, anywhere.
Just,
But that's a perfect example of it. And then what we know is that once I realized, when I started getting more paying attention to what this time thing was doing to me, I was like this driving, and then I realized the world didn't stop if I was a few minutes late. So I can only control what I can control.
Right.
And I know that
you can't control the car in front of you, right? You can't control the weather.
You can't.
Right? You can't control if you get, you know, always control if you
And that comes back to your idea of the energy and what you said. It's the only thing that's fluid.
It's the only thing that's perfect.
The only thing that we can count on.
Right.
And speaking of energy, the one piece that Sherry and I are going to incorporate every time we come together with you, that we have believed so strongly in, is self-care.
Absolutely.
And so each
14 years we've been talking about self-care.
And so every week we're going to encourage you to think about, how do I do that? How do I do self-care?
Yes.
And it's something, what I really want to talk about is that self-care is something that you do intentionally.
Yes.
And it can be very small. And I'll give you my closing example is, self-care for me is an hour by myself in the morning.
Nice. Yeah.
So regardless of what time my day starts, I get up that much earlier just to be in the presence of me. And if I don't do it,
And some people might do it at night. I mean, they might not. I'm an early morning person like you, so
I'm committed to it.
I'm committed as well. But again, it can be any time of day. It could be in your car. I mean, some days it is. Some days I will purposely drive earlier to where I have to pick up my kids,
so that you can just be in the presence of you.
So I can sit in the parking lot and just breathe.
And that's just an example of self-care. So we are really at the end of our time, Sherry.
Yeah.
And this has been a nice beginning, this conversation. And we're looking forward to it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.